Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our news bulletin for tonight, to be presented jointly by Bassem Makdash and Rashid Haider. Syria is taking part in the Group of 77 plus China summit in Bolivia, which kicked off activities on Saturday with the participation of the participating countries calling for a more fair new world economic order. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, in an inaugural address to a crowd in Santa Cruz de la Sierra Stadium, laid emphasis on the necessity of backing the Syrian people's struggle against terrorism and imperialism. President Maduro said, "A Syrian flag caught my eyes as I walked in. We have to remember the struggle of the Syrian people and their steadfastness against terrorism and their patrons," also saluting President Bashar al-Assad in his speech. Speaking about the perils of snowballing terrorism in the region, Maduro wondered about financing terrorism in Syria, Iraq, Venezuela and Ukraine, the countries which he says present a unified front against imperialism. President Maduro said leaders of the summit are pressing for a fight for a fair and sustainable economic growth and for a new world economic order. Bolivian President Evo Morales, on his part, has reiterated his country's support for Syria under the leadership of President Bashar al-Assad in its war against terrorism and imperialistic hegemony. The remark came during a meeting with the Syrian ambassador to Venezuela, Ghassan Abbas, on the sidelines of the activities of the G7 of the Group 77 China Summit held recently in Bolivia with the participation of Syria. The Bolivian president's statement at the 77th summit was very critical to what he called imperialist countries. President Evo Morales, who described the Security Council as the Non-Security Council and the Council of Imperial Interferences Council, called to stop its works. He added that the United Nations, instead of pledging security and peace, was helping in launching military operations in service for some countries. The reason for that, as Morales stressed, is to control the resources of the developing countries. U.S. Senator Richard Black has stressed that Syria is heading towards triumph and is gaining further international support regarding what is going on in it, as it will succeed in putting an end to the U.S. interferences. More details are in the following report.
In an interview via Skype with the Syrian Al-Ikhbariya satellite channel broadcast Sunday, the U.S. Senator Richard Black said, "We try to convince the U.S. to withdraw its clumsy policy towards Syria, asserting that there is a flagrant contradiction inside the U.S. foreign policy institution." The U.S. Senator Black said, "Historically, Syria is a civilized nation that calls for peace, enjoys an ancient civilization, as its people possess huge cultural heritage, and its people stand together, as it has been shown during the last presidential election process when President Bashar al-Assad won it. He held the firm unity of the social structure in Syria, the wisdom of the Syrian leadership, and the bravery of the Syrian Arab army, in addition to the Syrian diplomacy, which has achieved a wonderful work." The U.S. Senator said, "President Bashar al-Assad proved that he has a strong leadership personality in facing the events in Syria, as he can put an end to this attack on it." He slammed those who support sending weapons to the terrorists in Syria, pointing out that supplying lethal weapons to the terrorists will result in big repercussions, since these weapons will be used against their people later. The U.S. Senator apologized to the Syrian people regarding what had been said about not respecting the presidential elections in Syria, whether in the U.S., Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, or any other state. He hoped that Syria will restore peace, asserting that it is an honor to visit Syria in the near future.
The General Command of the Army and the Armed Forces said in a statement that after eliminating scores of terrorist gangs and inflicting heavy losses upon them, units of the Syrian Arab Army, in cooperation with the National Defense Forces, restored security and stability to Qasab city in Latakia's northern countryside, after a series of accurate and successful operations in which control was tightened on Nab'ain town and the surrounding areas. The statement pointed to the importance of this achievement in terms of the geographical location of Kasab, as it smashes the illusions of the aggression and its tools of securing a marine port and establishing a buffer zone along the borders with Turkey that forms a base for launching terrorist acts against the Syrian people. The Syrian Arab Army units seized a large quantities of weapons, ammunition and vehicles which were left by the armed terrorist groups who fled under the heavy strikes of the Syrian Arab Army, including rockets, mines, explosive devices, mobile hospitals, RPG launchers, gas cylinders or gas canisters, heavy and medium-sized machine guns, 2 Turkish ambulances, Saudi sleeping bags, and flags written on them their Takfiri slogans. In Homs countryside, Syrian Arab Army units killed many terrorists and injured others, destroying their weapons and ammunition. A military source said that Syrian Arab Army units killed many terrorists and injured others in the villages and towns of Asele and at the Zafaraniya crossroad in Al-Rastan, as well as in Deir Foul, Housh Hajjo, Kisin, Ain Hussein, Al-Nasiriyah, and to the south of Al-Brej, destroying their weapons. Other Syrian Arab Army units foiled an infiltration attempt by the terrorists into Qamqam gas facility, killing all the terrorists. Meanwhile, Syrian Arab Army units targeted the terrorists in the farms surrounding the town of Sharshuh, killing many terrorists and injuring others. The authorities in Palmyra, Homs countryside, have meanwhile confiscated 2 archaeological artifacts stolen by terrorists who had excavated them illegally and hidden them in the area. A source at the province said that the pieces, which date back to the 2nd century AD, are funerary art pieces, with the first one being a bust of a woman made of limestone and the other is a head of a priest, pointing out that the pieces were prepared to be trafficked outside the country. Increasing numbers of prison inmates in provinces are being released pursuant to the Legislative Decree No. 22 for the year 2014, which granted a general amnesty on the crimes committed before June 9, 2014. Attorney General of Hama Province, Ayman Daqaq, stressed that 130 inmates had been released according to the decree. Daqaq stressed that new numbers will be released during the upcoming days after studying their files. The released persons, in turn, expressed happiness over this step, which asserts that the state is the real mother for all Syrians. Meanwhile, Attorney General in Aleppo, Ibrahim Hilal, said that 240 prisoners were also released according to the amnesty law. In Al-Hasaka province, Attorney General Nasser al-Dali said that 65 inmates have been released so far in implementation of the amnesty decree. Al-Dali pointed out that other 5 citizens benefited from the decree as they were exempted from punishment after they paid the due financial accounts. Meanwhile, in Homs, Attorney General Khalid al-Najjar said 37 inmates have been released from Homs Central Prison as per the amnesty decree. Back to you, Rashid.
Thank you, Basim. Prime Minister Wael Halqi has affirmed that the government is keen to follow the service, development and livelihood situation in all cities, particularly in Deir Zor, to rehabilitate the regions which were affected by terrorism and find suitable atmosphere to have the families return back to their regions. Meeting a delegation of the National Reconciliation in Deir Zor, Al-Halqi affirmed that cooperation among the Syrians has led to achieve a remarkable progress in the national reconciliation, which has a pivotal role in restoring peace and security to the majority of the Syrian lands, synchronizing with the victories of the Syrian Arab Army against the armed terrorist groups. Minister of State for Reconciliation Affairs Ali Haider has affirmed that the Syrian state is committed to get Al Yarmouk camp out of its crisis and to end the suffering of the Palestinians and the Syrian residents there. Haider told reporters following a meeting with head of the political bureau of the Palestinian Liberation Organization PLO in Syria, Ambassador Anwar Abdel Hadi, on Sunday, that the Syrian leadership wanted the Palestinians to have a solution to the crisis by their own. Ambassador Abdul Hadi, on his part, affirmed that contacts are underway among the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Palestine, and the Syrian government to end the crisis in the camps, particularly Al Yarmouk camp, which was invaded by the gunmen who forced families to flee the place and increase their basic sufferings, exactly as the Palestinian people were displaced from their homeland due to the Zionist occupation. Back to Basim for more news.
Thank you, Rashid. The Iraqi army has continued its military operations against the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, or ISIS, organization, winning and regaining control over the regions of Nineveh Governorate and Salah ad-Din. Tel Afar district witnessed fierce clashes during the last hours between the army forces and the ISIS militants. It is still, however, under control of the Iraqi authorities as locals have fled in large numbers away from violent acts perpetrated by the ISIS militants against civilians. In the meantime, the Iraqi Air Force targeted ISIS gatherings in Al-Fallujah city, resulting in the killing of 200 terrorists. Iraqi Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki, on the other hand, asserted that the Iraqi state had regained control on the ground as the Iraqi army, supported by the people, is advancing over the terrorist groups. The Israeli occupation forces escalated today their oppressive measures against the Palestinians, launching storming and arresting campaigns in the West Bank for the second day in a row, including dozens, among them former Palestinian Legislative Council Aziz al-Duwaik, in addition to former ministers and members of parliament, in a new violation of the Palestinian institution immunity. In Nablus, the Israeli forces detained 2 Palestinians following the storming of their houses downtown as they stormed dozens of houses in the village of Tel, west of the city. The detaining campaign included 5 other Palestinians in Tulkarm, Safit, Jenin, and the villages of Maythoun and Deir Ghusson, as the 20-year-old youth Sameh Jamal Qut was shot in his leg during the crackdown over the Palestinian youths in the eastern neighborhood in Jenin city. Back to you, Rashid.
Thank you very much, Basim. A 15-year-old boy was killed during a crackdown by the Turkish police against demonstrators protesting against the state project for building a new military site in Adana city, south of Turkey. The state Anatolian news agency reported that the Turkish police have used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the demonstrators, claiming that the dead boy was killed in a sound bomb. In the same context, 2 demonstrators were killed at the beginning of this month in Lejje city in Diyarbakir Governorate during a police crackdown in a similar situation as demonstrators were protesting against building new military sites in the region. In Bahrain, Al Khalifa forces arrested 8 citizens, including students, in an illegal breaking-in operation of 20 houses in Ad-Daza area west of the capital Al-Manama. The Bahraini Al-Wifaq Association asserted on its electronic website that these practices are systematic and ongoing, calling on the Human Rights Council, currently meeting in Geneva, to follow up on these violations and to end the suffering of the Bahraini people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, over to our final item with Basim.
Thanks, Rashid. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif has asserted that the 5th round of the negotiations in Vienna with the group 5+1 will work on the designation of the final solution for the Iranian nuclear file. Leaving Tehran today towards Vienna to participate in the 5th round of negotiations, Zarif said in a statement that he will exert all efforts to draw the conclusive agreement over Iran's nuclear file. On his part, Iranian Assistant Foreign Minister Abbas Araqji said that Zarif and the Commissioner for the Security and Foreign Policy in the European Union, Catherine Ashton, will decide how to begin and continue the negotiations. It is to be mentioned that the 5th round of the negotiations between the 2 sides is delicate and comprehensive and is expected to end with a final agreement as provided for by the Geneva Accord.
With that item on the Iranian nuclear file, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude our news bulletin for tonight. Thank you for listening.
Damascus Radio presents News and Views.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to all of you. The United States has launched 201 out of the 248 armed conflicts in the world since the end of World War II. A new report says, adding that 90% of casualties in these wars were civilians. The report, published in the American Journal of Public Health, June 2014 edition, and written by David Swanson, says, since the end of World War II, there have been 248 armed conflicts in 153 locations around the world. The United States launched 201 overseas military operations between the end of World War II and 2001, and since then others including Afghanistan and Iraq. The report adds the proportion of civilian death and the methods for classifying death as civilian are debated, but civilian war deaths constitute 85% to 90% of casualties caused by war, with about 10 civilians dying for every combatant killed in battle. Swanson notes a tough defense of war is that it must be used to prevent something worse called genocide. Not only does militarism generate genocide rather than preventing it, but the distinction between war and genocide is a very fine one at best. The report further notes the United States is responsible for 41% of the world's total military spending. The next largest in spending are China, accounting for 8.2%, Russia 4.1%, and the United Kingdom and France, both 3.6%. If all military costs are included, annual U.S. spending amounts to $1 trillion. In other words, America has apparently adopted a total standard, spending more on military than most of the rest of the world combined. The United States spent more on its military than the next 13 nations combined in 2011, the report says. The United States is one of the strongest supporters of the extremist-marked war in Syria, which has killed tens of thousands of people over more than 3 years. Washington has been conducting a provocative policy toward the crisis in Ukraine, heating tensions with Russia, causing many to suspect rise of a new Cold War between the two world powers.
That was news and views from Damascus Radio. Damascus Radio presents Syrian Local Press Review.
Hello dear listeners, to all of you. Today's newspapers issued in Damascus give high prominence to the two main topics. President al-Assad received a congratulatory cable from Armenian President Syrian, wishing him success and the friendly Syrian people enduring peace. The Armenian president hoped that Syria will manage to restore security and stability for the prosperity and well-being of the Syrian people. Cables congratulating President Bashar al-Assad for victory in presidential vote continued to pour in from heads of states as well as official and public figures and parties. General Command of the Army and the Armed Forces said in a statement that after eliminating scores of terrorist gangs and inflicting heavy losses on them, units of the Syrian Arab Army in cooperation with the National Defense Forces restored security and stability to Kasab city in Latakia's northern countryside after a series of accurate and successful operations in which control was tightened on Al-Nab'in town and the surrounding areas. Titles run as follows. Meeting a delegation of National Reconciliation in Deir ez-Zor, Prime Minister Wael al-Halqi said the government is keen to follow the service, development and livelihood situation in all cities, particularly in Deir ez-Zor, to rehabilitate the regions which were affected by terrorism and find suitable atmosphere to have families back to their regions. He affirmed that cooperation among the Syrians led to achieve a remarkable progress in national reconciliations, which had pivotal role in restoring peace and security to the majority of Syrian lands, synchronizing with the victories of army against the armed terrorist groups. Minister of State for Reconciliation Affairs Ali Haider affirmed the Syrian state is committed to get Al Yarmouk camp out of its crisis and end the suffering of the Palestinian and Syrian residents there. Haider told reporters following a meeting with head of the political bureau of the Palestinian Liberation Organization PLO in Syria, Ambassador Anwar Abdel Hadi, the Syrian leadership wanted the Palestinians to have a solution to the crisis by their own. For his part, Ambassador Abdel Hadi affirmed contacts are underway among the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Palestine and the Syrian government to end the crisis in the camps.
That was a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning.
You are still tuned to the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic, Damascus Radio. Before signing off with the Syrian national anthem, here is another look at the news summary. Syria is taking part in the group of 77 plus China summit in Bolivia, which kicked off activities 2 days ago. Bolivian President Evo Morales reiterates his country's support for Syria under the leadership of President Bashar al-Assad in its war against terrorism and imperialistic hegemony. U.S. Senator Richard Black stresses that Syria is heading towards triumph and is gaining further international support regarding what's going on in it. Prime Minister Wael al-Halqi affirms that the government is keen on following the service, development and livelihood situation in all cities, particularly in Deir ez-Zor. The Iraqi army continues its military operations against the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham ISIS organization, winning and regaining control over the regions of Nineveh Governorate and Salahuddin. Israeli occupation forces escalate their oppressive measures against the Palestinians, launching, storming and arresting campaigns on the West Bank for the second day in a row. And Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif asserts that the fifth round of negotiations in Vienna with the Group 5+1 will work on the designation of the final solution for the Iranian nuclear file. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of our English transmission for tonight. You can join us again tomorrow at the same time on the same frequencies. Until then, this is Damascus Radio with all our staff members wishing you all the best and a very good night.